Well, hey everybody, here we are again with acoustic guru Anthony Grimani joining us in our video series on acoustic treatment. And Anthony's here once again. This is video number 6. If you haven't had a chance to see videos number 1 through 5, please watch those first and then join us here for video number 6. But Anthony's joining us today kind of as a wrap up to help put it all together and bring some visuals into play so you can see exactly actually where these devices will go inside of an acoustic space. So with that in mind, Anthony, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, Christopher. Good to see you too. How have you been?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Great, great, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, so this has been fun to go through all of these sorted acoustic topics one at a time.
Yeah.
We talked about the overall theory of reflections and what happens and what goes where and why you really do need to look into it. We did a basic and a deep dive of that. Then we talked about absorbers. We talked about bass absorbers, also known as bass traps. We talked about diffusers, and what types there are and what they do and stuff. And now you guys who have been watching through all of these, you know all this about these modules. Now I'm going to say these are all ingredients. Now let's talk about preparing a really nice dish out of this. Let's prepare a souffle, a beautifully delicious souffle out of all of this. And Christopher, I understand you're going to be going to France and eating a lot of souffle pretty soon, right?
I am. In about a week and a half, I'll be there. Can't believe it.
I'm jealous. Make sure to have a really good croissant for me, okay?
Will do.
So we're going to talk about putting it all together, cooking it all together, and there are a lot of different approaches and theories of how many of these absorbers, how many of these diffusers you use, where do you put them, what types do you put, which way do you orient them, and I'm going to present you a theory, which is my theory, it is mine, and to be fair, there's other approaches at doing it. I want to acknowledge that. If you look at different videos, you look at different read different books, you'll see different approaches. I do want to qualify that what I'm going to show you is a result of about, I'm going to say 30 to 35 years of trial and error, 30 to 35 years of reading a lot of books. On the other side of this wall over there, I've got 3 bookcases full of books on acoustics and psychoacoustics, and is the result of talking to a lot of people and building about 1,200 rooms in the last 25 years in which we've tried all kinds of different topologies and approaches. And sometimes we accidentally arrived at a solution that was like, wow, listen to this. That sounds really good. What did we do here that was different than last time? So it is an educated guess at how to place acoustical treatments in a listening space or a mixed room, a recording room that is going to yield good sound. Okay, so that's, I just want to qualify that. This is by no means the only philosophy you're going to say. There are no 100% hard rules in this. This is just the approach that my team and I have come up with over the years on how to make it work. So let's get into a little PowerPoint presentation here, something with a bunch of diagrams and arrows and boxes that show where it all goes, putting it all together. So as a reminder, I show this diagram quite a bit of a view seen from the top with a speaker that's made out of a red woofer cabinet and a horn on the top. Never seen a speaker like that, but hey, it's kind of cool. And a listener that kind of looks like me, receding hairline, kind of sitting there, listening to that speaker.
Aren't we all?
So there is in a room, there's a direct sound, which is shown here as a black line, and a bunch of reflections that bounce off the different surfaces in the room. Typically, the surfaces are walls, the ceiling, the floor. It could also be other elements in the room. It could be a window, could be some furnishing. But there's a whole bunch of reflections that follow the direct sound. That's the sound that's going from the speaker to you. And those multiple reflections make that the sound is repeated several times after it's left the speaker. And that's usually discussed in small room acoustics as the reflection decay time. Now, You may hear this discussed as reverberation time, and the reason I'm not going to call it reverberation here is simply that reverberation is that thing that you get in a big concert hall or a church, a thing that goes wah, like that. Can you say that? That sense that the sound has turned into this nice wash. Well, the fact is, in a small room, the sound never bounces around enough to really get to reverberation. So in order to not call it what it really isn't, I'm just going to say the sound's reflecting a number of times, and it takes a certain time for it to decay. There is a time and a spectrum for that sound given any type of room. That means that if you have that, most people put in there are going to go, that sounds good. And I did not invent that time and spectrum. I didn't come up with that. Who came up with that? Well, a bunch of people were worried about this about 35 years ago, 35, almost 40 years ago. A bunch of people who wanted to figure out, well, what is a good listening room? Well, how do you define it? I want to build speakers. I want to put them in a listening room, and I want to make sure I'm hearing what people are going to say this sounds good. So an international research consortium came together and tried to figure out, for different size rooms, for different types of program material, for different listeners, just what the ideal reflection decay time would be. And they came up with an answer. It depends on the room size. Doesn't depend so much on the person, the age, whether they're educated or not, but there's a pretty good statistical average to what people said, yeah, this sounds good. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Now, remember this from early on in our conversations. I also brought it up in the conversation on diffusion, that ideally, for a good sound, not only do you want the sound to decay at a certain amount for a certain time, but you also want the decay to be smooth. So if you had sound that left the speaker, hit you, and then bounced off a few surfaces, and then there was a gap in time and bounced again, where you had these pegs of reflections, that doesn't sound so good. Ideally, you get this direct sound and then some reflections, more reflections, more reflections, and they're relatively even through time. So what we're looking for is a combination of things. One is, how long does it take for the sound to come down from 0 down to 60 dB below that? 60 dB is 0.3% of the original sound. 40 dB is 1%. Another 20. No, I'm sorry. I'll take it back. 60 dB is 0.1% of the original sound. You ideally want that to be a certain time. You ideally want that to be spectrally even at all frequency. I'm about to show that. But you also ideally want those reflections to be evenly distributed through time. If you can do all of that, chances are most people that come into this room and listen to music, either played by an instrument, like an oboe, Christopher's favorite instrument. That you don't play the oboe, do you?
I don't.
You don't. You're a guitarist.
That's right.
For the reference to oboe, you got to go back to a previous presentation, and I won't say what the reference is. You'll see it. If you want that oboe to sound good, if a oboe is in a room in which you get a reflection pattern that looks like this, most people are going to go, well, that's a good sounding oboe. Or a speaker playing in that room, you're going to go, well, those sound like good speakers. So you got to have the right time. You want it to decay evenly, and then what is that time? Well, for small rooms, in what we're here to talk about, which is mixed rooms, listening rooms, places, not big spaces like theaters or concert halls. I'm talking about, smaller rooms. The decay time should be somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4 seconds. And like I said before, I always love saying this. Research shows that most people like that range of decay time. Now, what is that exact number? Somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4. Boy, that's a double the amount. So if you want to know what is the ideal decay time for your room, you need to know the volume of the room, which is the length multiplied by the width multiplied by the height in feet. You take that number, you divide it by 3,532. You take the cube root of that, you multiply that 0.3, and that would be your ideal decay time if you're measuring this in the imperial system. Yeah. Or in the metric system, it's much simpler there. You just take the volume of your room in meters, divide by 100, take the cube root of that, multiply by 0.3, and you factor in the price of gas in Lithuania that week, and you get what should be the target reflection decay time.
Of course.
So, Christopher, you're doing that right now, right? In your head.
In my head, yeah. You can't even tell.
Yeah. So that's getting a little mathematical, right? So those of you who remember math and know what a cube root is, or those of you who have a smartphone that you can actually find it, you can calculate this. You can just put that in and figure out what the number is. Now, handy rule of thumb is if you cover about 15% of the surfaces of your walls, your ceiling, front wall, side walls, back wall, ceiling with absorptive material at least 2 inches thick, 5 centimeters thick, you'll naturally get to that target reflection decay time. So
nice.
I like to use that a lot. I like to repeat that a lot because while the math looks kind of scary, there's a shortcut. You just cover 15% of your walls. Now, so the ideal decay time, actually this group that was doing that research thought they would find an ideal time that works for everybody. Well, what they find is it depends on room size. And those equations I showed you earlier are room size dependent. I've put it here on a non-linear chart because it is not a linear number. But if you just were to look at sizes of rooms between 250 square feet, which is about 25 square meters, up to about 500 square feet, 400 and 500, the decay time can be traced along this line. That's what it is. So the larger the room, the bigger the volume, the longer the ideal decay time is. In all cases, covering those walls with about 15% of absorption is going to get you there.
So you could use sophisticated measuring devices to see what your actual reverb time is in your own space, or you can just follow the 15 to 20% rule and you're going to be really close.
Right. So what's cool is that those sophisticated devices 30 years ago cost a fortune.
Yeah.
They were expensive pieces of hardware that ran on expensive pieces of computing equipment that took specialized microphones. It was pretty complicated. These days, you can actually download free software or pretty cheap software onto computers and other portable devices and run a measurement that's fed by this machine into your system and get a data point pretty easily. So the good news is if you want to measure this, it's not that hard to do. But if you just do this rule of thumb, 15%, you'll get there. Now, not only is it important to have the right time, but it's important for that decay time to be the same at all frequencies. So imagine that you used panels that were too thin, where they weren't absorbing at low frequencies, and you put 15% of them on the walls at 1 or 2 kilohertz, you would end up with a decay time of whatever the number is, 0.3 seconds. If they're too thin, though, and they don't absorb the bass, at some frequency, the decay time is going to go rising. So if I were to draw it in the direction that you're seeing this, that's what it would look like. There'd be more decay time at low frequency. And what that's going to do is it's going to make your sound seem more bass heavy.
I just love this point that you make. Once again, we're seeing a graphical representation here of what we've touched on in some of the other videos, where people that are looking for room treatment that don't know these things in advance may think that purchasing a 1-inch foam product absorber and just putting it all over the wall is one and done, and that's all they need to do, because that's either what they've seen someone else do or what they were told to do by an overzealous salesperson or whoever they encountered. And what's fascinating about this is that obviously results, as you said, in a low-end issue. And I think a lot of people will relate to the fact that getting the low end really nailed when they're either doing cinema stuff or they're mixing music is the toughest thing on the table. Right. And I think the biggest reason for that is the room they're working in doesn't have a balanced setup.
Right, absolutely. So the low frequencies, which you're calling the low end, I'm going to call it low frequencies. First of all, the target is for the decay to be equal at all frequencies. So no matter what you're putting in the room, it's reflecting, the reflections die out the same at all frequencies. Right. Otherwise, there's going to be an excess of sound in one region of frequency, most often the bass. So the room's going to be bass heavy. You're going to mix in a room that even though the speakers could be tuned right. If the room has a long decay time in bass, you're going to have more bass in there, and your mix is going to be bass shy.
Right. Exactly.
Or if you're just listening, everything's going to sound warm. Now, people generally like bass, but if you know what you're listening to and that oboe starts to sound like a bassoon, it's wrong.
Right.
I don't know that you could ever get to that point, but let's just imagine. So ideally, you want it to be the same within some tolerance, because our ears are only so accurate. So the generally accepted rule is that around that target that I mentioned before, plus and minus 15%, let me go back over here, plus and minus 15% is fine. I'm not going to say that you're going to hear the difference very much if you're plus 10% or 15% up or down. The other thing is, it is okay for the low frequency decay time to rise up all the way up to twice the amount. So if your target's 0.3 seconds, it is generally accepted that if at 63 hertz the decay time went all the way up to 0.6 seconds, it won't be detrimental. It's not great, but not detrimental. So this curve shows that generally you want an even reflection decay time between 200 hertz and 4 kilohertz. Below 200 hertz, it's okay for it to start rising up per these numbers over here. So where at about 100 hertz, you're up about 40 to 50% from where you were before. So if it was 0.3, you'd get to 0.45. And then at 63 hertz, you could go all the way to 0.6. And nobody's going to come into your room and go, God, that sounds awful. Mm-hmm. Same thing on the high frequency. On the high frequency, above 4 kilohertz, things can droop down a little bit, down to 50% of what you had. So if you had 0.3 seconds in the mid frequency, if it went down to 0.15 second, nobody's going to laugh at you for having a terrible room. Ideally, you want it all the same with some tolerance. So this is what that tries to show, is you want it smooth and a little bit of deviation is okay. And the way we deal with that in general, whether it's with Sonitus or something else, is you make sure you have some amount of absorbers that are the right thickness or thinness, somewhere between 2 and 4 inches, somewhere between 5 and 10 centimeters. And then you also have some that are thicker and thicker and thicker, strategically located to get rid of the low frequency absorption, including chairs. Chairs and couches are good low frequency absorbers, right? They're a big chunk of foam or springs, and they tend to absorb nice low frequency pretty well. And on the top end, you make sure that you don't have too much high frequency absorption. So what is a high frequency absorber, Chris, that doesn't do anything anywhere else? Christopher, you may or may not know this, but a lot of people have them in this region of their listening rooms. Carpets. Carpeting.
Oh, carpets. Yes, of course.
So curtains like this thing behind me, depending on the type of material, can actually be a reasonable wideband absorber if it's got a gap from the wall or the window. But if you cover the whole floor of a room with typical carpeting, maybe with a pad, and it's only this thick, which is half an inch, it's only going to absorb above 2 or 3 kilohertz, and it's going to absorb a lot because the whole floor is covered with it. So in a room that has fully carpeted floor, you'll see the high frequency reflection decay time droop down. It'll be short. So what do you do? Well, what I like to do is to have carpeting in the middle of the room and a perimeter of something hard. Hard being wood, tile, something else that balances it out. If you can actually plan this during construction, you can actually build up the perimeter a little bit so that your carpeting drops inside there and you don't trip. Now we're getting pretty specific. All right, let's look at something else. Now, to get it right, to get to these numbers I just said over here, I'm just going to repeat. You have to use the right amount of absorbers, typically frictional. That's stuff that's made out of fibers. Fiberglass, rock wool, cotton bats, foam, open cell foam, things that are sold for that. You have to have the right amount for the mids and highs. You have to have the right amount of bass absorption. So we talked about that in the session on bass absorption, which is materials that are either thicker and thicker and thicker, or preferably materials that are a combination of something that has a damping character to it and membranes in front, either perforated or not.
Right.
And what's the right amount? Well, you know what the target reflection decay time is, which is 0.3 times the cube root of the volume of your room divided by 3,532. Remember that? Well, that's the target time. But how do you figure out how many square meters or square feet you're going to do? Well, fear not, there's a way to calculate it. There's actually three equations, one called the Sabine, one called the Eyring, and one called the Arau-Puchades equations. The Sabine equation is oldish. It's from the mid-30s. The Eyring equation is from the 50s. The Arau-Puchades equation is from the 80s, and they get more sophisticated with time. Now, in order to use those, you'll need to know the absorption coefficients of the materials you're going to use. So anything you buy, you need to have data. You need to see charts from the manufacturer that show you, okay, we measured that at this lab, and here's the absorption coefficient or frequencies. You can plug it all into the equations and calculate it. You also need to be prepared to do a lot of math. Let's look at this. So the Sabine equation is good but old, and it looks like this. The decay time will be 0.049 times the volume divided by the absorptive surface area and the absorption coefficient. Okay? Not too hard to calculate. You can build an Excel spreadsheet if you love to do that. You can do that. I'm sure somebody has a spreadsheet online that you can do.
Yeah.
Now, there's a better one called the Eyring equation. Like I mentioned, that the first one's from the 30s, this one's from the 50s. That goes a little further because the calculation is 0.049 times the volume divided by the total surface area and the natural log of 1 minus the area weighted average absorption coefficient. So not just the absorption coefficient of the panels, but how much contribution they have to the area, and that was the advance that Eyring came up with, is a more precise thing. There again, you can build an Excel spreadsheet. The numbers are all in there for natural log and all this other stuff. You can do that. But wait, there's more. If you hang out a few more years, if you go all the way to the 80s and you look at a Spanish researcher called Arau-Puchades, this is the best equation. It's sort of a derivative of this one, but split into the three axes. So it's some of the same information, but you can separate between the front to back axis, the left to right axis, the top to bottom axis, and you can plug all this into Excel, and actually with about 10 different types of coefficients for materials, you'll actually blow up Excel because it's such a thick amount of calculation that it'll go. I know, we've done it. Anyway. So that's the Arau-Puchades equation. Either way, you got to prepare to do a lot of math. Right? Ready, Christopher? Ready to go? Can you do this on your iPhone?
I've done it in my head already.
In your head, he's already figured it out.
Yeah.
So you can do all that, or
here we go.
For sitting through all of this blah, 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 the shortcut is simply use about 15% of the available surface of your walls to put absorption there, including your ceiling, cover about 15 to 20% of diffusion. If you guys have watched my session on diffusion, put 2D diffusers towards the front areas of the room. Those are diffusers that scatter the sound on a plane, on a two-dimensional plane, a hemi-disc. And 3D diffusers towards the back and tops of the room. Those are diffusers that scatter the sound into 3 dimensions, a hemisphere. You don't want to put all the absorbers together, because what will happen is some waves are going to hit big sections of walls and bounce back, and other ones are going to get totally absorbed, and your ear, brain, your psychoacoustics are going to go, what's going on here? It's all dead there, and it's all reflective there. That's not natural. It's just not normal. So you want to spread it around. I like to just kind of distribute the absorbers around pretty evenly. I do like to put a thicker amount of absorption in the middle of the back wall. We'll cover that a little later. But basically, you distribute it around the room, and you interleave the diffusers with the absorbers. That, after lots of trial and error and lots of reading theories about how you interpret it, that's what's come up to be the main direction of how to do this. Now, finally, what's interesting is an asymmetrical layout works better. What I call the asymmetry is where there's an absorber on the what I'm going to call the left wall. To you guys, this looks like the right, but the one to my left, across the wall from it, I usually like to put a diffuser. And when there's the diffuser here, I like to put an absorber, either directly opposing each other or slightly offset.
So no mirroring of the same devices on the two walls.
Right. What's up with that? Why would you ever do things asymmetrical? That's like, most people, including me in the beginning, was like, that doesn't feel good. I want to make sure that the walls are reflecting the same way. This was an accident.
Wow.
Built a room. installer didn't read the plans correctly and built it asymmetrically. Sounded great. The imaging was fantastic. There was like a phantom center. It was like beautifully tight. The spaciousness was wonderful. Everything was great. And I'm like, wow, it sounds amazing, but you put the panels in the wrong place.
Oh my.
Oh, I did? Yeah. Oh, you're right. Okay, we're going to break for lunch. Can you go ahead and take
Put it all
them
back.
down and put them all back where they had to be? Thank goodness in this particular case, the panels used very similar cleats, so it wasn't that hard to swap them around. Come back from lunch, do some more listening. What'd you do? It doesn't sound good. But what I mean by sound good is that thing we always love, which is the ability to hear really clear phantom center between two speakers, and then spaciousness around, really well contrasted, was all gone.
Wow.
We're all looking at each other like, what, did I eat something weird? Are you noticing this? Yeah, everybody's noticing. So now sheepishly, I go to the installer, I go, would you mind putting this all back the way they were before? You know, lots of eye rolls, like, make up your mind. It's like,
Oh God.
I don't know what to say. I helped though. We moved all the panels around. Boom, there it was. The imaging was good. It's like, what's up with that? So what I did, which is what you should always do when something doesn't make sense, I went into research mode. This is a while back before you could go to the internet and find everything. Went to the UC Berkeley library and found in their section on acoustics, I found a bunch of papers, and there was one paper by a Greek acoustician that specializes in psychoacoustics that discussed what's known as interoral dissymmetry. The fact that the reflections are different, that what's coming from this side and coming from that side allows you to hear things more naturally and allows your brain easier to hear that those are reflections, that's the real sound. I'm like, wow, that's kind of weird.
Maybe
Think
that's
about it.
because in nature, you're never going to be in a perfectly symmetrical space. I don't know.
Right. Well, it's a little more than that. So check it out. Pair of speakers placed over here, sending sound to you symmetrically. Your two ears are receiving it. It has high correlation. The two sounds are exactly the same. And you interpret that as, wow, there's a phantom center, which in itself is kind of weird that two sources over there can be interpreted by the brain as being a fake center. But that's how we work. If what's going into our two ear canals is identical, we go, it's over here. Now, what if the walls are also returning two sets of sounds that are identical to your ears? We got a problem.
Yeah.
Because you got one intended pair giving you a phantom image, and then just a little later, you have another phantom image. Now your brain goes, I don't know which one of these is real.
Wow.
Whereas if you scramble it up and you do some dissymmetry in the reflected character, it doesn't have to be very, very different, just offsetting them even by a foot, by 30, 40 centimeters. If you scramble it up enough, tongue twister, you have an easier time in going, okay, that's the intended correlated sound. The rest of that is just fuzz.
Yeah.
So that's why we generally like asymmetrical layouts. Now, more things on getting it right. Don't forget to treat the ceiling. I work in rooms in which they've done everything on the walls and nothing in the ceiling, or sometimes where they've done everything on the ceiling and the walls are all reflective. It's like, no, you gotta do the walls and the ceiling. Now, also remember to use diffusion. I know I've already brought that up, but diffusion is a really important element. It used to be that diffusers were crazy expensive, so people just didn't use them. They were like $800 a pop for a 2x2 or 1,000, and I can't afford that. They've gone way down. There's a bunch of people, including Sonitus, that have very cost-effective diffusers. They improve the sense of spaciousness and immersion in the room, and they also enhance the absorption effectiveness, and it's just a magical tool. You may find, I've mentioned this on the session on diffusion, you may find that you may need to reduce the absorption a bit as you add diffusers, because the absorbers are working more efficiently because they're receiving more diffuse sound in the room rather than just the individual reflections from the speakers. Now, let's look at a diagram that preaches all this. Let's look at a room that would be, I don't know, 18 or 20 feet long, 6 meters long by, 15 or 16 feet wide. In which, here I am sitting in the middle with my receding hairline, and in which I've put 3 speakers across the front, 2 side speakers, 2 back speakers, and a bunch of treatments. And what I put here is an absorber, then a diffuser, a 2D diffuser, an absorber, 2D diffuser, an absorber, and then a 3D diffuser. Then I put a door, because I got to get in and out. And on the door, I put an absorber. Then looking at the right wall, same thing, but offset with the symmetry. On the back wall, I've put 2 absorbers in the middle of the back wall and 2 3D diffusers. In the corners, I've shown them here as base absorption, as a thing that's, can in the corner, however that thing is made. And on the ceiling, I've put some absorbers here and some diffusers towards the back. Okay, let's imagine a room like that. Let's look at those 4 walls individually. They're actually named here. This is wall A, B, wall C, D. So this is the left wall over here, C, D. Here's our left wall, where we have a speaker. There's plenty of wall space. There's a pair of 2D diffusers, 2 by 2, 60 centimeter by 60 centimeter. I'm showing them schematically as a curve. It could be a slotted diffuser, it could be any type, but it's basically just a hemi-disc type diffuser. There's an absorber panel, pair of diffusers, absorber panel, pair of 3D diffusers, absorber panel. Here's our front speakers, in this case behind an acoustically transparent screen, because you're serious about your home theater or about your mixes. And then a surround speaker up here, up about 5-6 feet in the air. Okay, that's a good layout. Now, I know that looks like a lot of treatment. Let's look at the amount of absorption. If you take those 3 absorber panels and grab them and put them all the way down here, just so you can see relative to this room, if it was 25%, and you divided that across, it would fill this entire bottom section. It's less than that. It's 15%, 15 to 20%, right? So while it looks like a lot of panels, it's only 15% of absorption, about 20% of diffusion, some base absorption done.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, the right wall. Similar to the left wall, offset, we have an absorber, a pair of diffusers, absorber, pair of diffusers, absorber, pair of diffusers, in this case 3D here, 2D there, and an absorber on the wall. Front speakers are over here. Surround speakers, or what I call side speakers, are over here. Same thing. In this case, this is about 20% coverage of the space because we have an extra panel on the door. All right, back wall looks like this. I already had shown you from the top view. Pair of absorbers in the middle of the back wall and diffusers on the outer side. Let's talk about this a little bit. You'll see a lot of recording studios that are covered on the back with diffusers.
Yeah.
That was a trend from the 80s that came out of some idea that that would work really well. And there was 1 or 2 papers that theorized that may be a good idea. I'm saying research papers. And there's about 20 research papers that show it's a bad idea.
Oh boy.
Including one seminal one. I am trying to remember here. I'm going to say it was by Dr. Floyd Toole and Dr. Sean Olive, presented at the San Francisco Audio Engineering Society conference sometime in the 90s. So a while back.
Wow.
So a while back, a bunch of guys said, no, you don't cover the whole back wall of a room with diffusion. The paper was called About Diffusion and Confusion, and it showed listening tests that show that people go, once you do that, you get really confused about what the imaging is. Don't do it. More work showed that it's a generally good idea to absorb the energy that's traveling from front to back in the room, because that energy hits your 2 ears at the same time every time it goes through, and it tends to mono up the sound. It tends to make everything seem really narrow. Makes sense, right? So having a reflection directly from the back wall, either slightly scattered or direct, is like putting a center speaker behind you, just delayed from the front one. It goes back and forth. You definitely want to absorb that axis, which is why I'm putting absorbers right here. I'm also putting a diffuser up here to get rid of a flutter echo in the height of this room. It's a good idea. Okay, so what do we get from all this? Looking at little diagrams and arrows, this is the diagram I always come back to. Here's our direct sound, blue line going from the speaker to my head, your head, her head, anybody's head who's sitting here. And then we have a first reflection, which is all the way out here at about 60 degrees. It's absorbed. This one at 50 degrees is diffused. This one is absorbed. This one's diffused. This one is absorbed. These other ones are diffused. So what you'll see in this diagram is there's still reflections in the room. There's some absorption. There's some scattering. what you're hearing is a combination of a direct sound, some reflections from the hard surfaces, some scattered and therefore reduced in size and more scrambled out reflections. Overall, the sound field is smooth and orderly rather than be these big slaps that are banging around. Another way to look at that smooth and orderly sound field is you have a direct sound accompanied a little later by this really nice crescent of sound that goes all the way around you, that doesn't have any particular slap at any time. And it is as smooth as that buttery croissant you're about to eat when you get to Paris, right? First thing off the plane, you're going to go to a boulangerie and you're going to get, right?
You know it.
Can you send one in the mail to me?
Oh, it'll be hard as a rock by the time it gets here.
That's the problem with those. You got to eat them right when they come out of the oven at 4 o'clock
right.
in the morning.
Yep.
Anyway, this sounds amazing. I mean, I'm now into the more than 1,000 built. I've spec'd and worked with people who've built more than 1,000 times this kind of thing. And in the end, it's like, wow, I hear the phantom center beautifully. I hear the chorus is wonderful. I hear the white instruments. I hear the stuff that's pan out of polarity over there like a mile away. It all comes out really smoothly.
And you touched on, too, how this will massively reduce fatigue.
Yeah. So what's the fatigue?
That's a big deal.
So the fatigue comes from certainly if you have bad speakers that are really bright, we're going to assume you're starting with decent speakers. But if you're in a room in which there's a lot of reflections or chaotic reflections in which your brain is trying to untangle what's the real sound, where's the real image, where's it coming from versus the other things, it's fatiguing. And at first you don't notice it, but after 2 or 3 hours, you're like, man, I just can't listen in here anymore. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to get to. As a final reminder, when it's all said and done and you looked at it clinically using an impulse response, is the measurement you make with a microphone, you'll see something that looks like this. The direct sound from the speaker is first, and then there's a train of reflections that decays smoothly, decays down to 60 dB at the target time your room size was supposed to get to. Everything works out right. You can measure this. You can actually do this these days with quite a few different choices of software. You can buy a reasonably good test microphone for about $80, $100. It's a USB mic you plug into your laptop. It's all pretty easy to do these days. But that's a kind of in your mind. I'd like you to be thinking of that, hey, what my sound should look like is it's coming out of the source and it's reflecting and it's just decaying smoothly, equally at all frequencies.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
I keep saying this, Christopher, does this help? Does this clarify things? What's up with all this?
Yeah, well, it's just amazing. It's been such a treat to do this series with you. I've even learned a lot, even though I'm already in the industry. So it's just something that everyone could take refresher or new information on and improve their space. I have a question, though. Do you have an extra minute just to go through a couple of renderings that we've got here? Because I'd love to just get your take on what you think they look like and how they might work and stuff like that.
You guys notice how he always does this to me. It's like, I just want you to explain this. And then it's like, can you look at how this applies to my product? Fine.
Well, hey, what can I say, right? It's my job.
Let's see. So why don't you share that? So there we go. So Sonitus layout schemes. So tell me about this. I know that in the world of Sonitus you can buy an individual absorber or diffuser, or like in boxes of 3, 4, whatever.
Right.
Or you can buy a package, right? And so tell me about this whole package system. I know from talking to you that it follows these recipes we just talked about having the right amount of absorption, the right amount of diffusion, putting them in the right place. But give us an example of what this is over here.
Yeah, well, this is just an example of one of the packages that people can consider purchasing. And as you can see, fortunately, I'm relieved that it mimics most of the training that we had today from you. So you can see the various devices on the walls placed in the way that your schematic kind of suggested. You don't have the benefit of seeing the adjacent wall, but those are not mirrored as we talked. They're scattered in a different way, so to have that asymmetrical sound breakup in the room. But this is just kind of more of our entry-level package with 4 fusers, quad fusers, deco traps. and the canvas absorber on the ceiling as a cloud there. And this would work great in any home theater, home recording studio, for the audiophiles out there that just have, high-end turntables and they want to make sure they're hearing all of their expensive equipment in the best, most even, accurate way. We just thought it would be good to put packages together for folks that just want to kind of purchase the one thing and move on.
Right, right. Yeah, you're right. This follows kind of the recipe. This is the quad fuser, right?
Yeah.
And this is a quad zorber. Just happens to be turned the other way. You could turn it whichever way you want. This is another diffuser. There's an absorber. There's some absorbers on the ceiling with some of your four fusers up at the top. Yeah, I see that. And then of course low frequency absorption in the corners in the front, and then this thing called the deco absorber, which is a bit of a mid bass absorber. Cool.
Yeah.
So what is this? So this is this looks like a higher end solution, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You can see that there's more pieces in the pack, more low end absorption. Some of the legato products are there with that flocked tympanic velvet membrane.
Right, which works a little bit better. It's a bit more expensive. I remember it gets better low frequency performance.
That's right.
It's got this curved thing, so it looks really nice and smooth. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and some big fusers, which are scattered about. But it's basically, you can start to see kind of a pattern appear here, which I hope is demystifying this beyond, or in addition to the presentation you gave today, where people can just get a sense of that 15 to 20% rule visually and really understand that this is not a major situation to be afraid of doing, but the benefits are going to be unimaginable.
Right. Right, absolutely. Yeah. So you're right. This does follow this thing we just talked about: an absorber, a 2D diffuser, an absorber, a 3D diffuser,
right,
and then absorbers on the front area of the ceiling up here, and diffusers on the back. I realized I skipped over this. I'm sorry. So let me cover this. Whereas I have generally found it's good to interleave absorbers and diffusers around the walls, I've usually found that on the ceiling it's good to have absorbers towards the front to capture that first reflection, and then scattering devices sort of seating position in back to get a bit of a diffused return. You can certainly try some interleaving, but the interleaving is going to bring maybe too much energy back down from the ceiling. Trial and error if you want. We've tried it a few different ways, and that's what's worked. So,
yeah.
And then tell me about this. This looks more luxurious, actually.
It is, yeah. This is where we're getting into some of the real wood products and just a different aesthetic, really. And I think it's the first time you're seeing the 6-strip, which we touched on in a previous video, and that's the device that you're seeing on the left wall between the two blue products there. That wood slotted product called the 6-strip is one of my favorites. As I mentioned, it's actually a combination absorber and diffuser all in one.
Cool. And
Very
I
cool
think,
device.
Right. And I think on this system, you're also using the thicker absorbers, like the 12 centimeter ones. Just work. So this is more of the same theory in terms of placement and application, using higher end materials. These diffusers are all solid wood, right? So they're they work a bit better at low frequency, and they cost more. It's solid wood. Cool.
Yeah, that's why it's the Ultra.
So here's for a 250 square foot room. This is a smaller room, 25 square meters. So this is okay. So this shows the standard package for a few different room sizes, right? What is this? Oh, all the way up to 650. So big room, 650 square feet, which would be 30 foot long. More panels, more absorbers, more diffusers. Same theory, right? Just interleave them, put stuff where it's got to be. Not too much, not too little. Yeah.
Yeah, again, you can see the pattern kind of emerge, which demystifies some of the placement aspects of these. Even as the room sizes change, it's still kind of the same philosophy of application.
Then you have in the Ultra line, the higher end one, I see this is the 350, 650. Yeah, same pattern, just bigger room, more materials stay with that about 15% of absorption, 20% of diffusion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Right, yeah. Oh, tell me about this. This looks like a nice rendering. How
It
do you get this
is.
done?
Well, our engineers have the ability to do these renderings
Oh,
and do them in quite realistic form. So this is an example of that that's a little bit more three-dimensional looking with the texture treatment and things so people can really get a sense of what that's going to look like in their space.
cool, cool, cool. And there's a cinema 650, big room. Cool. All right. Well, why don't we summarize? We've talked for lots of time. So, summary of all this. You said this was a series of 6 presentations. I've lost track, but I hope you believe me that room acoustics affect any audio system in a serious way, big time. Very simply put, I'm just going to say that half of the sound you're hearing comes from the quality of the gear, half of it comes from the quality of the room acoustics and that whole installation. I know you talk about this trifecta, which is right. We should break this into 3 pieces. The sound quality does come from the source material. If you have a really bad recording with bad musicians, poorly engineered, I don't care how good your speakers and acoustics are, it won't sound good. So to have that nirvana, you need good program material, played over a good gear, and in an environment that's acoustically well studied. So it's really those 3 pieces that have to come together. And to get the room acoustics done right, you got to look out for the reflections around the walls, including the echoes, the reflections off near boundaries, the reverberation or decay time, and standing waves, which I touched a little bit on in the actual presentation on bass absorbers. I would love to do a session on standing waves. It would probably be a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes, but if you want to, I can go a little bit more in depth on that. It's an interesting and challenging topic.
Would love to do that.
Yeah. So what I like to say is with basic science and care, you can tame room acoustics. Don't think that you're stuck with whatever the acoustical character of your room is. Like, I hear that a lot. Well, the acoustics of this room suck. There's nothing I can do. It's like, yeah, you can go do a little bit of investigation, spend a little money, and you can get it done right.
Mm-hmm.
So now,
here we go.
Why don't you tell us about this?
Well, I had a feeling that once these videos get out into the world and get posted, we're going to get inundated with, how can I get to Anthony? How can I get to Anthony? So we created a link, ladies and gentlemen, on our website. You can see it right there. I'm going to post it below as well so you can click straight through. But this acoustical guru here, who's been so generous with his time with us, is also available for direct consultation, and he will work with you directly on your specific room needs and requirements. And I've known people that have done this with him, and everyone says it's the best money they ever spent. So I highly encourage you to consider that. Anthony, I don't know what else to say, man. This has been such a treat, hugely educational for me, which just helps me do my job better. So thank you for all of that.
You're welcome.
And man, I love what we've got going here, and I really hope we can do some more videos coming up.
Well, let's definitely do so. Now, I'm not done giving you some good advice. Check it out.
Oh, wow.
Good reading material. I do want to say that most of what I just spewed out over here doesn't just come from my genius. You call me a guru. No, dude, I just read. I just listen to other people. And
But
just
you understand
learn
it,
from them.
and that takes a lot of brain power.
Yeah, it does. You got to be able to read. But here's a list of really cool books you can read. If you say, I want to learn more about this, first thing is go pick up the Master Handbook of Acoustics by F. Alton Everest. Amazing book. I think there's 7 editions.
Wow.
And well, it's not 7 volumes. It's just evolved over time, and it's very cool. It's a very useful piece of literature on room acoustics, and you'll find a lot of the things I talk about reflected in there. Another book called Acoustics and Psychoacoustics. There's an audio engineering handbook. There's all these different things in here. Project Studios by Newell. These are all really good books to read. They're not that hard to read. if you really want to do a deep dive into the science of absorbers and diffusers, this is really the text by Trevor Cox and Peter D'Antonio. Great reading. Manfred Schroeder wrote, he wrote a lot about small room acoustics, and there's a really good book. And then, of course, there's the book to end all books. My good buddy, Dr. Floyd Toole, wrote a book that's really the result of, I'm going to say 60 years of research and investigation and conclusions. And I actually think there's a fourth edition. I forget. I think there's a more recent edition than this. Buy that book. It is pretty thick. It's relatively easy to read, but it'll teach you a lot of the things I've just covered over here. So those are good references to use if you want to learn more about this stuff.
Incredible. I love it. Thank you so much once again. And man, we just can't wait to have you back.
All right. So we'll do another session on more propeller head, engineering topics, standing waves, and other things we can think about.
Yes, sir.
Until then.
Okay, man. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Go be a rock star and eat a bunch of croissants for me. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.